So in this segment, we're going to be talking about really bad adversarial journalism towards nurses and the nurse strike. LBC journalists are not having a good week for me. Anyways, you've got Lewis Goodall talking absolute nonsense about the single market and using crappy arguments, and now you've got Sangeeta using absolutely crappy arguments, and it's just misses, no hits. In the words of Drake. So let's have a look at this.
The economy is in crisis, arguably a worse crisis because of this government's, or certainly the previous government's actions.
I'd say this one as well. I mean, Jeremy Hunt's setting out the budget, but okay, we might be splitting hairs at this point because they're all really the same kind of governments. They're the same party.
Tories, let's call them. We also know that patients could die. It's very hard to justify
It's a big appeal to emotion right there off the bat.
Action right now, this winter, isn't it?
So the concern about the impact on patients is
Sorry about the audio, it's very sharp. I can't help that.
Always what means that that deciding to take strike action is such a difficult decision for health workers. And
it is a difficult decision, and we accept that, but it's
it's the fact that they don't really want to go on strike because they understand there are consequences to them going on strike. But the fact is, nurses have had below inflation pay rises for over a decade now. The cost of living crisis for them is extreme. And there are lots of them leaving the field over poor pay, a lack of respect, and also the fact that staffing levels are so low. That's something I covered, I think, during the pandemic, where the average kind of shift for nurses, they are understaffed automatically. NHS bosses are paying through the nose for agency staff. And all sorts of stuff. The deaths would have been far lower during the pandemic had we had a full-strength NHS. So, for NHS workers to go on strike, I genuinely believe that they are making the right decision, and I'll happily take their word for it because I have that much respect for them. Genuinely.
Timing, sir. I'm asking about the timing. Is the timing? Can you genuinely justify the timing, given there is a risk that patients might die in a worst-case scenario?
So what health workers are saying is that every day when they go to work, they know that because the pay issue hasn't been addressed, because the other staffing issues haven't been addressed, that the dangerously low staffing levels are causing harm at the moment.
So the argument she's using that people might die, so the journalist is using, Sangeeta, is that reality is already happening right now. People are suffering already. Due to the chronic shortage of, healthcare workers. So to use the argument that, if you go on strike, people might die and these bad things will happen. It's like, it's already happening now. And unless they stop, essentially stop the bleeding within the NHS, it's only going to get worse, much worse than it is now.
I was talking myself to a colleague who works in the ambulance service the other day, investigating another needless death because that patient was not reached by an ambulance for something entirely fixable.
So I accept all...
And, we've heard that from Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer spoke about someone who, I think it took over an hour for, an ambulance to get to that person. And the fact is, the NHS just don't have the staffing numbers right now. So to argue if they go on strike, bad things will happen, etc. Bad things are happening right now, and something has to change here. And the only way the nurses and the healthcare workers think there's, a way to make a stand is by going on strike, which I don't blame them for.
Accept everything you are saying, but the question is it morally right for health workers who are passionate, who are committed to their jobs, who are working in incredibly difficult circumstances, who frankly, in my opinion, do deserve a pay rise?
Okay, how are they going to get a pay rise if they don't fight for it at this point? Because the Tories have given them below inflation pay rises for the last 12 years. We applauded them as heroes. As we, ill-equipped them with PPE, and some of them died because of a lack of PPE, and there was no compensation, not really. How can you say that? How can they justify a strike? They have absolute justification already for a strike. Ridiculous arguments.
Is it right at this moment in time, when we have just come out of COVID, when we have a backlog of waiting lists, when we've just seen one old lady pass away waiting to be cared for in A&E right now? Could you have picked a better time?
When is the right time, though? When should they have done it? During the summer? During the spring? When is the right time to do it? The whole point of a strike is to show how useful you are, and that you deserve a pay increase because of how much you contribute to your work or to society, for example. And there would be no better time to show it during the winter. If the government actually cared about stopping the strike, they would negotiate with the union. So for her to make these arguments for appeal, she's just doing the Conservative Party's job for them.
Well, had the government paid or made the announcement about NHS pay when it was owed on the 1st of April this year, instead of waiting until the very end of July in order to deliver the settlement, then we would have been having these conversations 6 months ago. We can only respond within the government's timing, and they have deliberately pushed this into the long grass. So what we're hearing from staff who work in key roles across the different NHS occupations is that they have reached the end of their tether, and they feel that the two choices available to them is that they either engage with what I know you've been covering in other sectors, the quiet quitting, where they just decide to leave for better paid and less stressful work elsewhere, or they stay and put up a fight to demand that the government has a go at funding the NHS properly and boosting pay and getting staffing on a sustainable footing.
Understood. Sarah Gorton, Unison's head of health, who chairs the NHS group.
It's just the argument she was using is ridiculous. She could argue she's playing devil's advocate here, but the argument she could have used is, is there no other option here? Like as we head into winter, what have the government said to the union, etc. What is the government's current pay offer? Why isn't it enough? And then I would have spoken to her about the below inflation pay rise and given the person the kind of leeway to discuss the fact that they haven't had proper pay rises in the last decade. They have massive staff shortages, etc. That's the kind of way I would have gone about it. But instead, she took an overly aggressive adversarial tone with someone who is fighting for better rights for healthcare workers. Like, genuinely, like, why would you attack like a person who's definitely morally in the right there? It doesn't make any sense. I don't know if this is LBC style. I don't watch a ton of their content, I'll be honest. But between this and Lewis Goodall, this clip coming out on the 15th of November and the Lewis Goodall one coming out on the 18th of November, it's getting a bit ugly over there, and I don't know what's going on. But anyways, I'm gonna leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.